Title: The Deadly Charms of Anjette Lyles, a Southern Town's Darkest Secret. Chapter 1, The Perfect Hostess. Smiley face, a bustling diner in Macon, Georgia, 1950s. The smell of fried food lingers in the air, customers chatter, and a jukebox plays a lively tune. The camera focuses on Anjette Lyles, blonde, elegant, and glowing with Southern charm as she greets customers. In the heart of Macon, Georgia, during the booming 1950s, there was one woman everyone knew: Anjette Lyles. She was the radiant face of the town's most beloved restaurant. The food was famous, but it was her charm that kept customers coming back. Everyone loved Anjette. But beneath that dazzling smile, hid something far more sinister. Smiley face, close-up of Anjette laughing, then suddenly shifting to a cold, calculating look. Smiley face, Anjette moves through the diner, effortlessly weaving between tables, greeting patrons as though they were family. Her laugh was infectious, her embrace warm, and her voice carried a smooth Southern melody that made every greeting feel personal. "Hey Betty Ann, gimme some sugar. And Paul, don't you look just as handsome as you wanna be?" She made every customer feel special, as if her restaurant wasn't just a place to eat, it was a home away from home. Smiley face, a young waitress whispers to a cook in the back. "Waitress, you ever notice how Anjette never seems to really listen when she talks to people? Like she's always thinking about something else." Cook shrugs, flipping bacon on the griddle. Cook, a woman running a business alone, in times like these? She's gotta be tough. But yeah, sometimes I see it too. That look in her eye. Like she's thinking 5 steps ahead. Smiley face, evening at the diner. Customers finish their meals. Anjette leans against the counter, tapping her nails idly, watching them leave. But Macon wasn't just charmed by Anjette. They pitied her, too. A widow at such a young age, left to raise 2 daughters and keep her late husband's business afloat. They admired her resilience. What they didn't know, was just how far she'd go to get what she wanted. Smiley face, a black and white flashback. Anjette's first husband, Benjamin Lyles, is seen behind the counter of the original Lyles's restaurant, pouring a stiff drink. Benjamin Lyles had owned the place first. A hard-working man, but one with a weakness for whiskey. The kind of man who made big decisions when he was 3 drinks too deep. Like selling the restaurant for a measly $2,500, without telling his wife. Smiley face, Anjette standing in the doorway, watching Ben stumble through their home. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't beg him to undo it. She simply watched. And waited. Cut to, Ben months later, lying in bed, pale and sweating, clutching his stomach as he convulses. The sickness came suddenly. The nosebleeds. The delirium. The violent convulsions. And when the doctor gave his diagnosis, encephalitis, Macon mourned the loss of a good man. But behind closed doors, Anjette never shed a tear. Back to the present, Anjette wipes a spotless glass behind the counter, her lips curled into a faint smile as the last customer leaves. And just like that, she was a widow. A widow with a life insurance payout, and a restaurant to reclaim. Chapter 2, A Widow's Resilience, or Strategy. Flashback, 1947. A radiant Anjette, dressed in a delicate lace wedding gown, stands beside Benjamin Lyles, her new husband. The camera captures her eyes full of ambition, as if already looking ahead. Cut to years later. Ben, hunched over a bar counter, gripping a glass of bourbon, his hands unsteady. His once promising demeanor is now dulled by alcohol. In the background, Anjette stands near the door, watching. Anjette married young, her future tied to her husband's family business, Lyles's restaurant. But Ben had a problem: he loved the bottle more than he loved success. And alcohol, as it often does, had turned a man with potential into a shadow of himself. Smiley face, Ben, laughing raucously with a group of men at the bar, his speech slurred, his movements exaggerated. The bar is dimly lit, filled with the scent of cigarette smoke and spilled liquor. The bartender shakes his head as Ben tosses back another drink. For years, Ben drank, and Anjette ran the restaurant with quiet determination. She never complained, never begged him to change. She let him spiral, let him gamble away their future one reckless decision at a time. Until he made a choice that even he couldn't undo. Smiley face, a hastily written contract. The ink is still drying. A handshake between Ben and a smug-looking businessman. Money is exchanged. The sign outside Lyles's restaurant is taken down. When Ben suddenly sold the restaurant without a single word to his wife, the town expected a storm. They expected Anjette to rage, to fall apart. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed silent. She simply waited. Cut to Ben at home, disheveled, staring blankly at the floor. Anjette stands in the doorway, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Ben. I had to, Anjette. We needed the money. I had no choice. She doesn't respond. Instead, she walks over, places a hand on his shoulder, and whispers. Anjette. It's all right, baby. Things always work out in the end. And things did, just not for Ben. Smiley face, months later. Ben lies in bed, his skin pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. His nose suddenly begins to bleed. He groans, clutching his stomach, his body writhing in pain. Anjette calmly dabs at his forehead with a damp cloth. It started small. Fatigue. Nosebleeds. Then came the convulsions, the violent spasms that left him gasping for air. Doctors called it encephalitis. But there were whispers. Whispers that the sickness came too fast, too sudden. And Anjette? She remained the devoted wife. Ever so patient. Ever so caring. A funeral. Black umbrellas dot the cemetery as Ben's casket is lowered into the ground. Anjette stands in the front, a single tear trailing down her cheek. She dabs it away delicately, then straightens her posture. By January 1952, Ben was dead. And Anjette? She was a widow. A widow with a life insurance payout. A widow with a plan. A bank. Anjette walks to the counter, her hand steady as she slides a document across. The bank teller nods, counts out a stack of bills. She places them neatly in her purse, her expression unreadable. A tragedy, or was it an opportunity? Chapter 3, Rising from the Ashes. Smiley face, Anjette's diner, now thriving. Customers greet her warmly, and she smiles, kissing them on the cheek. The scent of fried chicken and homemade biscuits fills the air, blending with the low hum of conversation and clinking silverware. Macon adored Anjette. A single mother, a hard-working widow, she had taken tragedy and built an empire. She repurchased the restaurant and renamed it Anjette's. Business was booming. But happiness never seemed to last long around her. Anjette standing behind the counter, her blonde curls perfectly in place, her lipstick unblemished. She laughs, pouring a cup of coffee for an elderly customer, touching his shoulder lightly. Customer. You're a miracle, Anjette. After all you've been through, look at you now. Stronger than ever. Anjette. Laughing, Lord, I had to do everything myself. I only thank God my Ben had a little insurance. People admired her strength, her resilience. No one questioned how she had come so far, so fast. No one asked how a widow, left with 2 young daughters, had managed to buy back a restaurant that had been lost. They simply embraced her success. But beneath the soft southern accent, behind those honeyed smiles, was something much colder. A late night in the diner, long after closing. Anjette sits alone at a booth, flipping through a stack of papers, bank statements, business records. Her fingers drum against the table. She tilts her head, deep in thought, then reaches into her purse and pulls out a small glass bottle. The liquid inside glistens under the neon lights. She smirks. Success came easy to Anjette. But so did ambition. And in her world, obstacles didn't last long. A new man in Anjette's life, Buddy Gabbard, a confident airline pilot with a charming grin. He pulls Anjette close on the dance floor of a local club, the two spinning to the rhythm of a live jazz band. Then came Buddy Gabbard. A man unlike Ben. A man who had his own money, his own future. A man who offered more than just companionship, he offered security. And for Anjette, that meant one thing: marriage. Fast forward, a wedding chapel in New Mexico. Anjette and Buddy exchange vows, the justice of the peace rubbing sleep from his eyes. They sign the marriage certificate, and Anjette's smile is triumphant. A whirlwind romance, a quick wedding. It was perfect. For a time. But just as quickly as Buddy entered her life, he began to wither. Cut to Buddy sitting at the dinner table, his face pale, his hands trembling as he reaches for his water. Anjette watches, a soft smile playing on her lips. Buddy. Weakly, I don't feel right, my stomach, my skin's burning. Anjette. Sweetly, oh honey, you just need some rest. Let me fix you something warm. She kisses his forehead before walking into the kitchen. The camera lingers on the steaming pot on the stove as she carefully sprinkles in a white powder. She stirs it slowly, methodically. First came the rash. Then the fever. Then the unbearable swelling. Doctors couldn't explain it one day. Buddy was a strong, capable man. The next, he was weak, his body betraying him. The town whispered of a mysterious illness, a cruel fate. But Anjette? She only sighed and adjusted her veil of grief. Cut to Buddy's funeral. Anjette wears a black dress, a delicate lace veil covering her tearless eyes. Mourners whisper as she gently dabs her cheek with a handkerchief. Another husband buried. Another widow left behind. Another insurance payout. The camera zooms in on Anjette's face as she lowers her handkerchief, her lips curving just slightly into a knowing smile. Chapter 4, Love and Death, a Pattern. 1955, a wedding chapel. Anjette stands beside her new husband, Buddy Gabbard, a handsome airline pilot. The justice of the peace clears his throat, looking slightly irritated at being woken for such a late-night ceremony. A few dim lamps cast long shadows across the small chapel. Soon, love found her again. Anjette married Buddy Gabbard, a respected pilot. It seemed like a fresh start. A new man, a new beginning. But history has a way of repeating itself. Cut to the honeymoon suite. Buddy, still in his tuxedo, lifts a glass of champagne, his free arm wrapped around Anjette. Buddy. Grinning, to our future, sweetheart. To a lifetime of adventure. Anjette. Softly, with a slow smile, to a lifetime. They clink glasses. Anjette takes a small sip, while Buddy drains his in one gulp. She watches him closely, her fingers running along the rim of her glass, lost in thought. Months later. Buddy sits at the kitchen table, his face pale, sweat beading at his temples. His hands tremble as he rubs his arms, scratching at an angry red rash spreading across his skin. It started with a rash. A small thing, nothing to worry about. Just a heat rash, maybe. Then the fever came. The unbearable swelling. And before long, Buddy could barely stand. A doctor's office. Buddy lies on the examination table, his body stiff with pain. The doctor leans over him, examining his swollen limbs with a furrowed brow. Doctor. Shaking his head, it doesn't make sense. We've tested for infections, allergies, nothing explains this. It's like his body is shutting down. But if medical science couldn't explain it, the town had its own theory: fate was cruel to Anjette. Once again, she had been given love, only to have it stolen away. Buddy in bed, barely able to move. His eyes are sunken, his breath labored. A close friend kneels beside him, holding his hand. "Buddy." Weakly, voice hoarse, "Let me die. I can't take this anymore." The camera shifts to Anjette, standing in the doorway, watching with an unreadable expression. And by December, he did. The funeral. Mourners in black stand in the cemetery. The preacher speaks softly, but Anjette isn't listening. Her gloved hands are clasped together, her eyes dry. For the second time, Anjette wore black. For the second time, she stood at the graveside of a husband. And for the second time, she did not cry. A widow's veil hides the faintest hint of a smile as she turns away from the casket. Anjette at the insurance office. The clerk, a polite older man with kind eyes, slides a document across the desk. Clerk. "Sincerely, Mrs. Gabbard, I'm so sorry for your loss. These things take time, but we process the claim as quickly as possible." He hands her a check. She takes it with steady hands, offering a small nod of appreciation. "First Ben. Now Buddy. 2 husbands, 2 insurance policies. Coincidence, they said. Just a streak of terrible, terrible luck." Close-up of Anjette folding the check neatly into her purse. She lingers for a moment, then smirks just slightly before snapping it shut. But luck had nothing to do with it. Chapter 5, The Family Curse. Or Calculated Killings. 1957, Julia Lyles, Anjette's mother-in-law, sits in a rocking chair, sipping tea on the shaded porch of her home. The Georgia heat lingers thick in the air. Anjette, smiling sweetly, joins her, placing a delicate hand on the older woman's shoulder. Now, all eyes were on Anjette. Even her mother-in-law, Julia, began whispering accusations. "She's a witch," Julia said. "She killed my son, and she'll kill again." The words were brushed off as ramblings, until Julia herself fell sick. Julia at the dinner table, a bowl of steaming soup before her. Anjette watches as the elderly woman lifts the spoon to her lips, eyes twinkling. Julia. Suspiciously, "You treat me too kindly, Anjette. Makes me wonder what you want." Anjette. Softly laughing, "Oh, Julia, your family. Family takes care of each other." Julia takes a slow sip. Anjette watches with quiet satisfaction. Weeks later. Julia in a hospital bed, her face pale, her body swollen. The doctor frowns as he examines her frail form. Anjette stands beside the bed, stroking Julia's hand, her fingers adorned with rings. August 1957, Julia's body broke down mysteriously. Her skin changed color, her limbs swelled. The doctors couldn't explain it. But Anjette remained at her bedside, dutiful, loving, ever the perfect daughter-in-law. Doctor. Frowning, "This doesn't look like any illness I've seen before. We'll run more tests." Anjette. Sweetly, "Bless your heart, doctor. I just want her to be comfortable." Cut to, a September morning. The Lyles house is draped in black. Mourners gather as Julia is laid to rest. By September, she was gone. A frail old woman taken by a mysterious illness. Another tragedy in Anjette's orbit. But no one asked too many questions. No one dared. Close-up of Anjette standing by the casket, a pristine lace handkerchief in her hands. Her eyes shimmer not with tears, but something else. Something knowing. Then came the will. Julia had mysteriously left money to Anjette. A generous sum. Enough to keep the restaurant thriving. Enough to keep Anjette comfortable. The Macon County Clerk's office. A legal assistant runs a finger over Julia's last will and testament, her brows furrowing. She flips through records, then stops. Her eyes widen in shock. But later, officials would find something strange. The will was a forgery. Anjette, alone at home, lighting a candle, a sly smirk creeping onto her lips. But even that wouldn't be the last time death came knocking. Not as long as Anjette was around. Chapter 6, The Unthinkable, A Mother's Betrayal. 1958. A dimly lit bedroom. The curtains are drawn, blocking out the harsh Georgia sun. Anjette's 9-year-old daughter, Marcia, lies in bed, her tiny body trembling under soaked bedsheets. Her small hands clutch her stomach as she coughs violently, her fever raging at 106 degrees. Anjette sits by the bedside, stroking Marcia's hair, her face unreadable. Tragedy continued to strike. But no one suspected the real horror until it was too late. Anjette's own daughter, Marcia, fell ill. A violent cough, fever, unbearable pain. The little girl's cries echoed through the house. And as doctors fought to save her, Anjette made a chilling remark. A nurse adjusting an ice pack on Marcia's forehead. Anjette leans in close, her voice soft but firm. Anjette. Whispering, she'll be joining her father and grandmother soon. The nurse pauses, a flicker of unease crossing her face. A hospital room. Marcia lies motionless, her breaths shallow. Doctors and nurses work tirelessly. One injects her with medication, another wipes sweat from her forehead. Doctor. Sighing, turning to Anjette, we're doing all we can, but her body isn't responding to treatment. It's almost as if she's being poisoned from the inside. Poisoned. The word lingered in the air, unspoken, a shadow creeping toward the inevitable. Marcia's small hand slipping from her mother's grip. The heart monitor flatlines. And in April 1958, she did. The funeral. A tiny white casket. The town gathers in stunned silence. Mourners whisper behind gloved hands, their eyes darting toward Anjette, dressed in mourning black, standing rigid by the graveside. Neighbor 1. Whispering, first her husband's, then her mother-in-law, now her little girl. That poor woman, or maybe dash. Neighbor 2. Cutting in, don't say it. That's a mother. A mother couldn't dash. Cut to, the nurse from earlier, standing in the back of the crowd, watching Anjette with narrowed eyes. The words Anjette whispered replay in her head. But whispers had already begun. Something wasn't right. Something was terribly wrong. Chapter 7, The Letter That Changed Everything. A dimly lit coroner's office. A staff member sits at a cluttered desk, flipping through paperwork. A stack of medical reports sits beside him, untouched until an envelope, plain and unmarked, catches his eye. He picks it up, frowning, and tears it open. His eyes scan the page, widening with every word. For years, Anjette evaded suspicion. She was the grieving widow, the heartbroken daughter-in-law, the devastated mother. But one anonymous letter changed everything. It urged authorities to test Marcia's body for poison. The coroner pacing the room, holding the letter tightly. He stops, glancing toward a file cabinet, where Marcia's autopsy report remains incomplete. A moment later, he makes a decision. He picks up the phone. Coroner. Into phone, I need authorization for an advanced toxicology screening, yes, on a child's remains. Laboratory. Scientists work under bright lights, running tests on samples taken from Marcia's exhumed body. Machines whir, liquids are measured, charts are studied. The results. Arsenic lethal amounts. More than enough to kill a grown man. In a child's frail body. It was a slow, merciless death. And suddenly, the puzzle pieces fit together. A detective's office. A thick folder is slammed down on a desk, papers spilling out. Inside are medical reports, financial records, and the death certificates of Benjamin Lyles, Buddy Gabbard, Julia Lyles, and now Marcia. Detective 1. Looking at the file, she's been getting away with this for years. First her husband's, then her mother-in-law, and now her own daughter. Detective 2. Nods grimly, we've got enough now. It's time to bring her in. Cut to Anjette's diner, bustling with customers. Anjette moves between tables, flashing her signature smile, greeting customers with effortless charm. But what Anjette didn't know was that her time was up. The town she had fooled for so long was about to wake up to the truth. Chapter 8, The Witch of Macon. Courtroom, October 1958. Anjette sits in the defendant's chair, her expression blank. The wooden benches are packed with spectators, some whispering, others watching in tense silence. The air is thick with anticipation. The town that once adored her now demanded justice. Gone were the warm greetings and the affectionate smiles. Now, they whispered another name, the Witch of Macon. The prosecution presenting their case. A parade of witnesses takes the stand, former employees, medical experts, and those who had once called Anjette a friend. Witness 1, former employee. She talked about spells, curses. I thought it was just fun, you know. But then, she started saying things that didn't feel like jokes anymore. Another witness, a nurse who cared for Marcia. Witness 2, hospital nurse. She told me, she'll be joining her father and grandmother soon. I thought she was just grieving. Now, I know better. A former restaurant employee shifting in his chair, clearly disturbed. Witness 3, restaurant employee. I heard her say it. To her own daughter. I'll kill you one day, Marcia. And now, Marcia's dead. You tell me if that's a coincidence. The evidence was overwhelming. The poison in the bodies. The life insurance policies. The forged will. And now, testimony that painted Anjette as more than a calculating murderer. She was a woman who wielded fear like a weapon. The jury box. Faces grim. Unwavering. They knew what had to be done. Anjette was found guilty of murder in just 1 week. The jury deliberated less than an hour. The judge, solemn and authoritative, delivering the sentence. The courtroom holds its breath. Judge. Anjette Lyles, you are sentenced to death. A gasp ripples through the room. Anjette blinks but does not react. The gavel slams down. The crowd outside the courthouse. A mixture of relief and disbelief. Some hold signs that read "Burn the Witch." Others shake their heads, still in shock that the woman they had trusted for years had fooled them all. But even after the sentence, Macon's darkest tale was not over. Because Anjette was not finished yet. Chapter 9, A Fate Worse Than Death? A dimly lit common room at Milledgeville State Hospital. Patients shuffle around, some muttering to themselves, others staring blankly into space. At a small wooden table, Anjette Lyles sits, elegantly poised, shuffling a deck of tarot cards. A few patients watch her, mesmerized. Macon refused to execute a white woman. The town that once adored her now recoiled in horror, but still, they could not bear to see one of their own put to death. Instead, Anjette was declared criminally insane and sent to Milledgeville State Hospital, where she would spend the rest of her life. But Anjette had no intention of fading into obscurity. Anjette flipping over a tarot card, a grim depiction of the tower. She lets out a soft chuckle, eyeing the patient across from her. Anjette. Smiling, the cards never lie, sweetheart. Something big is coming for you. Better be ready. There, inside the sterile, locked halls of the asylum, she reinvented herself once again. Not as a grieving widow or a hard-working restaurateur, but as a mysterious seer, a woman who claimed to walk between worlds. Patients gathered around her, drawn to her charm, to the dark glint in her eyes. She entertained them with fortune-telling, spells, and whispered confessions of her past. Anjette leaning in close to another patient, her voice hushed, her eyes glittering with mischief. Anjette. They think I'm crazy. Let them. Otherwise, they'll fry me. Narrator. She played the part well, never giving the doctors a reason to doubt her insanity. But the whispers never stopped. Some believed Anjette was exactly where she belonged, locked away, unable to hurt anyone else. Others weren't so sure. A night nurse closing the door to Anjette's room. Inside, Anjette lies awake, her face unreadable. A tattered notebook rests on her nightstand, filled with scribbled notes and cryptic symbols. She closes her eyes, a smirk tugging at her lips. For 20 years, she lived among the damned and the broken, weaving her stories like a web, never truly losing control. Until finally, on December 4, 1977, Anjette Lyles took her last breath. No dramatic ending, no final act of defiance. Just silence. The now abandoned lot where Anjette's restaurant once stood. The wind rustles through the weeds, a faded for sale sign creaks against its post. Her story remains one of the darkest chapters in Georgia's history. A woman once loved, who turned her own home into a house of death. But some say, you can still feel her presence. That if you stand too long where Anjette's once thrived, you'll hear her laughter carried on the wind. Maybe she's still watching. Maybe she never really left. Final shot, a slow fade out of the abandoned lot, the screen darkens, and the faint echo of laughter lingers in the air,